Rock and Roll Radio. Stay tuned for more rock and roll.
I look horrible on television. I look mean and dreadful and solemn. It's only on radio that I can be who I think I am, which is a fairly decent guy.
When I was a kid, radio did not mean rock music. It did not mean all talk, and it did not mean all news. Radio meant using your imagination.
Good evening. I'm Peter Meek.
I'm Jean Blake, and this is Chronicle.
Today, even if they could, do people over 30 still want to dance all night? Even if they can't play all day, do they still listen to rock and roll? Boston radio stations are banking on it. A few years ago, however, the fear was that those who grew up with rock music would soon search for quieter pastures. So soft rock was invented. WEEI-FM was the firstest with the softest. Soon, other stations followed their lead, until it was discovered the appreciative audience wasn't large enough. So, WEEI-FM changed into an AM-style top 40 station. And within 6 months, its ratings soared. Now that everything has come full circle in the radio rodeo, new FM programmers are trying to break the new rules with old formats. And economically, none of this switching has hurt. It adds up to dialing for a lot of dollars.
If you're older than 30 and you listen to the radio, you don't like rock and roll, experimental sounds, or unfamiliar music, at least not according to the conventional wisdom. Lately, however, some unconventional people whose job it is to program this city's highly competitive commercial FM stations have been breaking all the rules and changing the face of Boston radio in the process. Peter?
Gene, the days of so-called soft rock and tightly controlled formats may be a thing of the past. Using an odd combination of computers, market research, and sheer love of music, Boston's FM programmers are returning to such varied formats as Top 40 and so-called freeform. Their goal, to snare a larger share of the all-important ratings. The key, they say, is good old-fashioned rock and roll.
Hit radio!
WBCN FM 104 Boston.
That's the new Primary Colors EP at WFNX, Boston Phoenix Radio. 93 WBOS.
Your favorite radio station changing on you? Not playing your favorite music anymore? Well, come on over to Magic 106 FM.
Accurate weather, great news and sports, and terrific music, plus 20 big ones.
Boston's new music authority, WHTT, with Doug Alling at 5:28 tonight at 7 o'clock. Alex Stone, and at 10 with Boston's 3 most requested songs. Be sure to check it out.
This is Rock and Roll Radio. Stay tuned for more rock and roll.
Do you remember rock and roll radio? If you're over 30, the conventional wisdom is that you just as soon forget rock's persistent thumping beat and take the boom out of the baby boom generation forever. But is that assumption correct? Jeff McLaughlin writes about radio for the Boston Globe.
The assumption, I think, was true when it was made. It does not continue to be true. I mean, truths are not static. I'm a good example of that, being 40 years old. What does that mean? That means when rock and roll was born, I was a teenager. I fell in love with that kind of music right away. It led me in a lot of different directions, but of course I'm interested in listening to good rock and roll. I'm not atypical.
Until recently, however, McLaughlin's views were not widely shared, at least among people who program radio stations. A host of so-called soft rock stations sprang up, like WMJX and WVBF, to service the over 30 set. Hard rock, on the other hand, was reserved for teens, as WCOZ's kick-ass rock and roll format proudly proclaimed.
94.5 COZ, Boston's kick-ass rock and roll station.
Lately, however, radio programmers have begun singing a different demographic tune. Oedipus is the program director at WBCN, Boston's #1 rated FM station.
Aren't there more adults than there are teenagers? So I would think that adults, if you think of yourself as an adult, what a strange word adult is. 18 plus is a much nicer word. We're 18 plus, and there's plenty of us who care about music. More of this than there are teenagers.
Oedipus is echoed by Rick Peters, program director of WHTT, which recently jettisoned soft rock for all hits and tripled its audience in 6 months.
Back when Top 40 started in the 50s, it was in fact a teen format. And if you were 16 in 1959, how old are you now? You're 40, close to it. So all of a sudden the format has a much broader appeal than it used to because we all grew up with Top 40 radio.
Despite his unconventional success, or perhaps because of it, Peters has plenty of detractors. Sure, he plays rock and roll, they say.
But he also only plays 50 records in very, very tight rotation, and his station is programmed by a computer.
But Peters says the computer helps him ensure variety.
For example, if I wanted to find out how many times Flashdance, one of the biggest songs in the city, played in the last 36 days, I could sit down with the music logs, it would be about this high, right, and say, okay, go through every single music log and figure out when it was played and then give me a report. It would probably take 2 or 3 weeks. With the computer, I can keep track by just typing in the name of the record, Flashdance, and in approximately 15 seconds, it will show me every time the record's been on WHTT in the last 36 days, and there it is. And what the computer helps do is make sure that you don't get the record the same time every day. Because people listen to the radio basically at the same time every day. If you get up at 8:30 and the radio goes on at 8:33, you're listening at the same time. If you turn on the radio station and hear Flashdance every day at 8:33, you perceive the repetition. If you don't hear it every day, if you hear a different song every time you turn on the radio station, you don't perceive the repetition as much. So that's what the computer does. It helps us make sure that people are getting the variety.
But people at Boston's 2 newest FM rock stations scoff at a computerized version of variety. Boston Phoenix publisher Stephen Mindich, who plans to break all the rules at the newly purchased WFNX.
I think one of the difficulties in talking to radio people is that they see things in a very tight spectrum, and radio stations generally are programmed narrowly, so that you have a soft rock format or an all-hit radio format or a talk format. I believe it is possible to present a format that is broad-based.
Are listeners really ready to hear something truly different? WBOS station manager Barry Skidelsky is banking on it.
They're tired of hearing the same old over and over. And if you want to hear something different, you can hear it on BOS.
Can innovative programming aimed at adults succeed on local airwaves? Or will the computer and commerce be king? To a large extent, it's a matter of degree.
What you have to figure out is, how much courage, how much bravery, how much foolhardiness with the big man's money in the corner office can you get away with?
We'll be back in a moment to talk live with one of Boston's top FM radio programmers, Sonny Joe White of KISS 108. Stay with us.
In the fickle world of radio, 1 minute you're up, the next you're down. About a year ago, WCOZ-FM was the #1 station in Boston. Today, it's not even in the top 5. But one station that continues holding on to a top slot is WXKS, otherwise known as KISS 108. Standing by live is KISS programmer and personality, as well as part owner, Sonny Joe White. Sonny Joe, we've seen an incredible increase in the number of FM stations over the last decade, and they've changed so much. Just what do you think they'll be like in 1990? Let's say it's 1990 right now. What's Boston radio like?
Well, number one, technically it's going to be much better. The new digital recordings will improve the sound of radio. I think you may see a lot of simulcasting, you know, with the welcoming of MTV and radio. I think will work hand in hand. Video and radio now, I think, are going to find themselves new partners.
Okay, with that digital effect, are we going to have computerization of personalities? What's it going to do to your job?
Well, that won't affect the personalities. I think that as long as you keep top-rated personalities on your radio station, you will have a top-rated radio station. Personalities become companions, and people seek companionship as the world continues to become more plastic or more fragile in its effect with relationships. I think companionship from a radio personality is going to be welcomed.
What do you say about this, though? A year ago, we did a program on radio, and we went out and we asked all the teenagers we could find on the streets what their favorite radio station was, and they said WCOZ, and we said, okay, who are the personalities? And they couldn't say them. What does that say to your theory?
That said that the station was not relying on personalities. They were relying on the music. What we do at KISS 108 is we build a combination of music and personalities, and with that type of relationship, I don't think you can lose.
Okay, but every station is different, as you've pointed out. How do you decide, as program director at KISS, what your audience is going to be?
Well, KISS came on the air as a disco station. The lifestyle of the disco listener was very flamboyant, real flashy in dress, real flashy in going out and spending money. So we had a target audience that was there. What we did was we took that audience and we tried to make the sound of the station much broader and more appealing to the masses. So we have the hits of today, we play the hits of today, as well as the music that will appeal to the quote-unquote hip, chic audience out there in Boston.
Okay, thank you, Sonny Joe. Our next story about radio has nothing at all to do with rock and roll. It's not really about Boston either. What it is about is a little town...
The highly competitive world of big city radio is the subject of tonight's cover story, and reporter Bill Selby will take us behind the scenes to that fast-paced world of Boston radio in The Radio Wars, coming up next. The world of home entertainment is changing every day. New kinds of cable TV, video games, sophisticated stereo equipment, and in the middle of it all, a touch of nostalgia. And you can find it all on your radio dial here in Boston. Bill Selby standing by now at a local stereo store with tonight's cover story, Radio Wars. Bill?
Well, Tom, you know, radio is more competitive than ever these days. In Boston alone, there are 37 stations competing for the same share of the audience. Now, recently, one station that was losing the ratings war adopted what is called a top 50 format, the playing of 50 songs over and over again, similar to the top 40 format a lot of us grew up with. Now, Top 50 has succeeded in a lot of other cities, but in Boston, it may create the biggest radio war of all.
WHTT.
Welcome to the studios of Boston's newest radio station. Until March 9th, it was called WEEI-FM, and its disc jockeys played a loosely defined mixture of rock, folk, and jazz. CBS, which owned WEEI, decided that sound was out of style. So CBS invented what it calls a format for the 80s.
103 FM, WHTT, Boston's brand new radio station, playing the hits, and only the hits.
Men at work on the new hit radio, WHTT.
WHTT plays 50 songs, that's it. Each is graded according to its popularity, and program director Rick Peters uses a computer to determine when each song will be played. A top hit will be heard every 2 hours, while number 50 will make the air only 4 times a day.
The Boston market, I feel, did lose something, but it gained something also. It gained another format that wasn't being done. We don't dictate to the public what they like. They tell us, through sales, through research, through call-outs, what they want. And if you don't give it to them, you lose.
Hit lines are open and waiting for you.
WHTT is hitting the air at the same time that one of its competitors, WBCN, is celebrating its 15th birthday.
I love working here. This is America's greatest rock and roll radio station, BCN. Here's Dexy's Midnight Runners.
BCN may be the most creative rock station in the country. As more and more stations package their sounds, 104 FM is still surviving by playing a wild concoction of progressive rock, oldies, and by giving airtime to local bands trying to make it.
50 songs. I mean, that's crime as far as I'm concerned, with all the wonderful music that's released. I mean, we play 50 new songs, let alone all the great music from the past. Our library is gigantic. I mean, we have 50,000 albums in our library alone, and play 50 songs over and over again and say, this is what music is about, is I find pathetic.
BCN is not only surviving, its ratings are improving. Proof its owners say that the consultants pushing the top 50 format are wrong if they think it will take Boston by storm. If WHTT and WBCN are at opposite ends of the spectrum, then WXKS, the #1 station in Boston, is hanging somewhere in the middle. KISS Radio does use a list of 50 songs as the backbone of its format, but it also plays oldies and local albums and makes a point of highlighting the personalities of its DJs like Dale Dorman and Sonny Joe White, who is also program director. He knows that WHTT is trying to steal away his audience.
Well, it's worked. You know, it's worked for the CBS stations in Philadelphia and in Chicago. The problem is you didn't have a BCN and you didn't have a KISS 108 in any of those cities. Their stations have won in those markets, and I think largely because they didn't have the competition that we're going to give them.
If the top 50 format works in Boston, other stations may get into the act. In fact, some of the AM stations that abandoned top 40 in favor of talk radio several years ago may once again return to the days of the hit parade and the top 10 countdown. Reporting live from Kenmore Square, I'm Bill Selby. Back to Tom and Robin.
Thank you, Bill. Takes us back a few years now.
Sure does.
Well, the stakes are high in this latest Boston radio war. If WHTT steals just one rating point from the competition, it could gain $1 million in revenue.
Where have we heard that before? Well, world headlines are coming up when News 7 continues.